What's going on, everyone? This is Ben from VGBlaster. I am back with another deck profile, and today I'm bringing you my Dragon Ball deck profile. This is a pure Sun Dragon build based on Bowel. Goal of the deck is to get into your impacts as soon as possible and use them to pretty much OTK your opponent. But I'll go into that as I go through the deck. So we're running Overturn Sun Dragon Bowel Dragon as the buddy because he's kind of a very key piece to the deck. So yeah, we're going to jump right into it. I will start with impact monsters since, as I said, they are the focus of the deck. So to begin with, we run 3 copies of the new Bowel Dragon. This is Bowel Dragon, Bowel Blaster, Grand Bolt. Core cost of put this card on top of a Sun Dragon or Thunder Empire monster on your field and pay to gauge. When this card attacks, it attacks your opponent and all monsters on the field. Act if you have 5 life or less, you pay to gauge. If you do, stand this card. So this card is really, really good. Obviously, when it attacks, as it states, its first ability attacks everything. If your opponent does cast a null spell, that will stop the whole attack on everything, so just be careful of that. And the accountability of pay 2 gauge to stand it is not once per turn, so as long as you have 2 gauge to pay and you're below 5 life, you can just keep swinging as much as gauge as you have. So yeah, this is kind of your main focus. The deck does burn a lot of your own life down, so you can get down to 5 life pretty easily. Obviously it's a bit of a risk if you don't kill your opponent, but that's kind of the way you have to play this deck. Ideally you will. It's quite easy to kill your opponent with this. This gets over a lot of stuff like Chaos, Prism Dragons, since it doesn't have to do with the center. It attacks your opponent directly regardless. 11k gets over Infinity of the Chaos. There are ways of boosting, or there's one card here that I run that boosts attack just in case you're against something like Zwei or anything that runs Jackknife Grand Thief, because that's 12k defense and Grand Vault is only 11k, so yeah. And our next impact monster is 2 copies of Bowel Dragon Bowel Weapon combination. Core cost to pay for a gauge and put this card on top of a Sun Dragon on your field. When this card enters the field, stand a Sun Dragon item on your field, and for this turn, that item can attack during the final phase. And the second ability of when this card link attacks with another Sun Dragon item, for this turn, that item and this card get penetrate and +1 critical. So this is kind of an alternative to Grand Bolt if you can't lower your life. If you don't have enough gauge, you can also call this additionally. I'll show you how later. But yeah, so if you can't go below the 5 life, your items in this deck are pretty good. You just go for this, swing for a big attack with penetrate, hope your opponent can't nullify it, and aim to finish them that way. So yeah, that's kind of just your backup. Or if you just happen to draw into it, you can use this as well. But as I said, Grand Bolt is your ideal. So jumping into normal monsters, we'll run 3 copies of the new Super Sun Dragon Bowel Soleil Dios. 838, put 1 or more monsters from your field into this card's soul and pay for a gauge. At the beginning of each player's attack phase, destroy or return to hand all monsters on your opponent's center. Damage you take are reduced by 2, and abilities of all cards on your field cannot be nullified by your opponent's card effects. So we run Dios because it's a really solid card, really good against maybe center-heavy decks. You can just destroy them. If they can't be destroyed, you can say, right, well, I'll bounce them back to hand. Anything like that. Its ability itself can't be reduced, so if your opponent has something like Overturn Missoria, if this card has a soul, you'll just lose a soul instead of returning to the deck. Stuff like that. And then obviously your opponent will try and deal with this card first, since it reduces all damage you take by 2. That's anything from effect to attack damage. It has double attack and soul guard. It's just a solid card overall. If you don't get, if you go first, it's a good card to call. You're going to put 3 damage on, and then you sat at quite a defensive position. You can control the life you take, stuff like that. So yeah, I like Dios. It's a pretty good backup card to have out on the field. So moving on to size 2s, we will run 4 copies of our buddy, Overturn Sun Dragon Bowel Dragon. Put the top card of your deck into this card's soul and pay 2 gauge. When this card attacks, put the top card of your deck. When this card attacks, put the top card of your deck into gauge, and for this turn, choose a card in your field, it gets plus 5,000 power. Overturn, pay 1 life during your final phase. Call up to 1 impact monster from your deck by paying its core cost and shuffle your deck, and then it has penetrate and soul guard as well. So obviously, as I said, this is the focus of the deck. You can use its overturn to go straight into Grand Vault. If you're at 6 life, that's ideal because you pay a life for the overturn. Then you're at 5 to start getting your multi-attacks in. It also gains, it does cost 2 gauge to get out, but when it attacks, it gains you another gauge, so technically it is only a 1 gauge cost. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. And yeah, it has Soul Guard itself, so it's hard for your opponent to deal with it. They have to destroy it twice if they want to get rid of it. If you call your Grand Vault over it, that then has an even bigger soul, or your other impact. Or even if you want to go into Dios as well, if you have the gauge, then you build up a nice healthy soul, so it's really hard for your opponent to deal with. So yeah, this is really good. It's one of the key cards of the deck because obviously it's searchable. This is also why we run 3 copies, because you do charge a lot of gauge in this deck, so you want to maximise your chance of it still being in the deck instead of like accidentally milling through it, which does happen, but not as much when you run it at a higher number. Our second Battle Dragon for the deck is Style of Impact Battle Dragon. Core cost to pay 1 life. Battle Dragon Force. When this card enters the field, choose and use one of the following 2. This Battle Dragon Force only activates once per turn. Put the top 3 cards of your deck into the gauge, or put 1 Sun Dragon item from your deck into your hand and shuffle your deck. So both those things are very useful. Your items are very helpful in this deck. They're not always essential, because ideally you are just going to go into Grand Vault, and if both your items cost 2 gauge, so that's 1 less attack from this. But can be very good. Your items can put a lot more pressure on your opponent, or you're just going to gain more gauge, which means more attacks. So yeah, unfortunately, obviously you can only use one of these once per turn, but if you're really desperate, I've done it before where my opponent's attacked me for gone second, your opponent's dealt 2 damage to you at 8, you call this to go down to 7, gain whatever ability, the gauge or get the item to hand, call another one for another life to put yourself down to 6. You don't get any of the abilities, but then you've got the life, and then you can call Overturn Sun Dragon, and then go into Grand Vault from there, stuff like that. So yeah, just little plays you can do like that to burn your life down. Because if it's going to mean the death of your opponent, you kind of don't mind. You can kind of blow through the hands in your card to do that. Next, for size 1s, we run 4 copies of Flare Fang Dragon. Flare Gift. When this card enters the field, if you have another Sun Dragon on the field, put the top card of your deck into your gauge and draw a card. Activates once per turn. More gauge, more hand, meaning you're more likely to get more attacks, more likely to get into the bowels or impacts that you need. Just a useful card. Gauge in a draw, always nice. Any Sun Dragons out as well, so even if you've just got an item out, you get the gauge in the draw. And finally, for size 1s, I run 2 copies of Sun Deity's Fragment Balglow. I don't really see people running this, but I actually really like it. So it's size 1 monster. If you call an impact monster from hand, its core cost is reduced by 2 gauge, so obviously that is from hand. So you can't use it in combination with Overturn Bowel, unfortunately, because it's called from deck. But yeah, so if you have this out on the field, and you say you use Overturn Bowel, go into your Grand Vault, do all the attacks and blow all your gauge. If you still have another one in hand, you can just call it for free, essentially, and then just get another attack. If you had an odd number of gauge and you have weapon combination in your hand, you can just pay 1 gauge to go into that. Once again, another attack, especially if you've got an item out, because then it's going to stand off this effect. So yeah, this Balglow is just really useful, as I said, because you run your impacts. You kind of dig through your deck quite a bit. You get a lot of gauge, but sometimes you do have to spend a lot of gauge to get into them. So Balglow just improves consistency. You know, even if you don't have Overturn Bowel, you can get Grand Vault out for free, and then just blow the gauge you have as well, if you're at the 5 life, obviously. So yeah, I really like Balglow. I think 2's good enough number for it, but yeah, I would suggest it. And finally, for monsters, we run 2 copies of Flare Fang SD. This card cannot be called to the centre. If your opponent does not have a centre monster, it gets plus 3,000 power, and during your turn, when a monster on your opponent's field is destroyed, draw a card. That only activates once per turn. Once again, a bit more draw. If you go into Dios, it's a good, there's another card in the field that can get you some draws, anything like that. You can draw into your impacts. If you don't have Overturn Bowel, or even if you do, and you can call multiple, as I said, with Balglow, stuff like that. Yeah, just drawing's always nice, obviously, in any form, so we'll take it. For items, I run 1 copy of Burning Dragon Force. Obviously, your items can be searched through Style of Impact, so I don't think you need to run them at a very high number. Burning Dragon Force is kind of a backup. If you don't, if you're not going to hit your 5 life, it's a better card to combine with weapon combination to a degree. Because, and I'll go for its effect. It's a really condition of, if you have a monster Battle Dragon that's kind of on your field, pay 2 gauge to equip it. When this card link attacks stand a monster on your field, this ability only activates once per turn. So obviously if you attack with it during your main phase, call weapon combination, stand it, link attack for 6 crit and penetrate, and then it stands weapon combination. That attack still goes through, and then you're going to have another one. Bowel weapon combination's effect is for the turn, so it will still have that extra crit and penetrate, so you can attack again for another 3 crit penetrate, so 9 total. Obviously, as I said before, your opponent can guard fit, stuff like that. Your opponent can guard it quite easily, but it's quite good if your opponent doesn't have the spells. It's going to end the life pretty quickly. You can also use it in combination with Overturn Bowel Dragon to get an extra attack off that, which means an extra gauge, because it's not once per turn, just when it attacks, and then you can pump something up even more. So yeah, I like Burning Dragon Force. I find one of is working pretty well for me. If you want to put it up to 2, that's fine, but for me, one's working just fine. And finally, for items, we'll run 3 copies of Dragon Force Style of Impact. Release condition: you have 6 life or less and a monster with Bowel Dragon or Bowel Soleil in its card name on your field. A quick cost to pay 2 gauge. At the beginning of your final phase, stand this card, and for this turn, this card gets +1 critical. This card on the field cannot be destroyed nor returned to hand. Its ability cannot be nullified, and it can attack during the final phase. So obviously, you attack with this, stands during the final phase with an extra crit for 4, attack again. Be very careful about your timing of that, because you can obviously attack for 3, stand off its natural ability, attack for 4, that crit is permanent for that turn. And then once again, this is why I run Bowel Weapon Combination, that enters the field, restands. That now attacks, Style of Impact goes up to 5 crit. So that's 8 crit penetrate, which you know is pretty good. So yeah, we like Style of Impact, and plus it's just an extra attack. You know you're going to get a lot with your Grand Vault, so you can keep going. After like 2 attacks, you've usually wiped your opponent's board, unless they've got something pretty drastic out or they've nullified it twice. And then if Grand Vault hasn't killed your opponent, you just swing at 4. Swing for 4 at your opponent, because they won't have any nulls left because they would have used them on Grand Vault. So yeah, this is why I like Style of Impact. 3 is fine. Once again, it can be searched quite easily. You dig through your deck a fair bit in this as well. So yeah. So finally, we'll move on to spells. For defense spells, we'll run 4 copies of Sun Dragon Shield, obviously. You only cast this card during an attack on your opponent's turn if you do not have a monster in the centre and a Sun Dragon card on your field. Counter, nullify the attack, put the top card of your deck into your gauge, and gain 1 life. If you have 2 or more Sun Dragon on your field, this card cannot be nullified. There's not that many nulls in the game right now anyway, so that's not really a big issue, but it is always useful to have if you're against something like Star Dragon Lord running a Spell Nullifier. Chaos tend to run that Ancient World card that nullifies spells now as well, and they'll just do a huge swing at you. So you can cast this and stop that attack. They can't do anything about it. They've wasted a huge attack. So yeah, that secondary effect can be pretty good. And then just gauge in life. As I said, in this deck you want as much gauge as possible. So for that vein as well, we'll run 3 copies of Blue Dragon Shield. You only cast this card during an attack on your opponent's turn if you do not have a monster in the centre. Nullify the attack, put the top card of your deck into your gauge. Everyone should know what Blue Dragon Shield does, but yeah, as I said, it's just here to, you play open centre, pretty much, so you're opening yourself to get killed pretty quickly in the current meta, so as much defense as you can is pretty good, and then you get in the gauge as well, meaning if you survive, you're going to cause huge problems for your opponent on your next turn. And finally, for defense spells, I run 3 copies of Steel Dragon Fangs. If you want to use Green Dragon Shield instead, that's fine, but I find this helps you control life more, because you only cast this card during an attack on your opponent's turn if you don't have a monster in the centre. Counter, nullify the attack, then pay on gauge if you do. The next damage you take will be reduced by 2. Usually your opponent will just bounce a nothing attack on that, but you are still forcing your opponent to waste an attack, which means you're surviving, and that's all you really need to do. As long as you survive and end with at least 2 life or so at the start of your turn, you're usually pretty safe to then pretty much go in and kill your opponent. So yeah, if you end up going first, you need these defense cards in your hand just to survive, and then to kill your opponent on your turn. Next spells, I run 2 copies of Heaven's Sunshine. Cast cost of pay 1 life. Destroy a monster on your opponent's field. If you do, call up to 1 Dragon World or Guardian's monster at the same size as that monster from your deck by paying its core cost and shuffle your deck. You may only cast Heaven's Sunshine once per turn. Really good for just removal of your opponent's cards. You run cards of every size in this deck, so you're either going to get a Bowel Soleil, a Bowel Dragon, your Bowel Glow, or Flare Fang, or your other Flare Fang SD. If you have Flare Fang SD out, you're going to get the draw off the Destruction. You're paying a life, which means you're closer to that magic 5 life to get your multi-attacks going. So yeah, Heaven Sunshine, just a solid card for every single reason. Next, 3 copies of Blessing of the Sun. Put the top card of your deck into your gauge. Then, if you have a Sun Dragon on your field, put the top 2 cards of your deck into your gauge. So, if you're really struggling and have nothing on the board, it's 1 gauge. If you have any other card that you can get out, you get in 3 gauge. Once again, just the more gauge you have, the more attacks you can do. If you happen to get 2 of these in hand, it's not once per turn. You're going to get 6 gauge. That's an extra 3 attacks. An extra 9 crit on top of the original attack and any other gauge that you already had. So yeah, Blessing of the Sun is quite good. If you want, you can bump this up to 4. I think I only had 3 copies that I could find. I might test it at 4, just because, once again, the more gauge you have, the more likely you are to kill your opponent. Next, 3 copies of Bowel Rescue. Choose one of the following 2, put the top 2 cards of your deck into your gauge. Once again, more gauge, always good. Or if you have a monster with Bowel Dragon, its card name, on your field, return 1 Sun Dragon monster from your drop zone to hand. So that's really good just for getting stuff you want. If you've accidentally milled your impacts, you can get them back to hand. As I said, because you do gauge charge a lot in this deck, so I've done it before where like every single impact's been in the gauge. So it's always useful to be able to get them back. It's not a hard condition to get a Bowel out, because you usually do. You run about 8 of them. You've got Heaven Sunshine. So yeah, Bowel Rescue is a really good card for both its effects. 2 copies of Drago Bond. You only cast this card if you do not have a monster in the centre. Counter, choose a monster on your field. The next time that monster will be destroyed, you gain 2 life and prevent it from leaving the field. Really good for everything. Most of your cards have Soul Guard anyway, so destruction isn't really a problem. But it just helps if you get a big monster out, especially get something like Bowel Soleil out, they're going to have to try and deal with that first, because otherwise they're not going to be able to do much damage to you. They know they run shields, you run shields, so they're not going to risk a massive link attack swing. So they'll try and get rid of your Bowel Soleil first, or anything like that. This just means they last longer, you're gaining life, staying in the game. So yeah, I quite like Drago Bond. It's not essential to the deck. If you want to knock it out, bump your shields up, as I said, bump Blessing of the Sun up, stuff like that, this is probably the card you can replace it with. And finally, I run 2 copies of Monopolized Sun, because I really like it. Counter for this turn, all Sun Dragon on your field gain power plus 3000, and all cards on your opponent's field gain minus 1000 defense. So this is obviously just used during your turn to make sure you're getting over stuff. This is mostly against stuff like Chaos, because they all have like stupidly high defense, and you're like size 1s, and even some of your other Bowels aren't that great in terms of attack power. It also helps if you're stuck on Dios, get over like 10k defense, if you're, like I said, for stuff against Chaos, against your Gear Gods, against your Infinity Chaos. You really just kind of need this to get over those magic numbers. And also against stuff like Granthese, the Gaia and the new Gaian, they both have 12 defense, so you're essentially gaining 6. But it balances out, so they lose 3, they go into 9. If you're stuck on something like, well, if you're on Dios, he gains 3, he goes up to 11, stuff like that. So yeah, I find Monopolized Sun is just really good for certain matchups. You could argue it's a sideboard card. If you want to put it in the sideboard, that's fine. But I quite like it in the main board because, especially against a Thora as well. This is good against a Thora, because that deck's like a real threat at the minute. It's a real hard deck to get over. So obviously, your Grand Vault is your answer to that, but you can start putting a bit more damage into them. Especially if they get Adamant Thora out, or Alexander Thora out, sorry, they're gonna have a huge soul. So your Grand Vault won't always clear it if your Grand Vault's not going to kill your opponent. So yeah, Monopolized Sun I find is quite useful to have around. So that will do it for this deck profile. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you have any questions or suggestions, leave them in the comments and I will definitely reply to them or answer them or anything like that. I always reply to everything. So yeah, if you enjoyed this, more deck profiles coming. I have filmed my Dragon World Jackknife and a Thora build, so they're coming down the line. I'm working on a new Star Dragon World Jackknife build as well. I've seen an interesting list pop up over Japan in the weekend that I find quite interesting, so I might play around with that. I'm not going to copy it. I don't like the whole build as it is, but there's some ideas in that deck that are really quite good. So yeah, more stuff coming. I will try and get some fights filmed with these decks so you can actually see them in action instead of me just rambling on about them. So yeah, so look forward to that. Subscribe if you haven't, hit the notifications so you can see those videos as soon as possible. Get your ideas flowing. It is spring circuit season, so you need to get those decks ready. I know I'm still undecided on mine. I probably will play Jack just because it's me, because ours is at the end of June. Plus we'll be on the Solar Strife meta by that point, which is looking quite interesting, especially stuff for these Sun Dragons. I will be building a full Bowel Rescue deck and updating this pure Sun Dragon build. So yeah, plenty of stuff to look forward to. So stick with us here at VGBlaster. I've been Ben. I'll see you guys very soon. Bye now.